Hi, I'm Wilder and I'm an alcoholic. It is a puzzle. It is a puzzle why I'm here. Why me? I want to thank you ahead of time for sitting and listening to my story, because this is good for me. This means that I have to reach back and remember what it was like well enough to tell you, which means that it helps me remember where I came from and to think the drink through. I had young children when I came in the program, and I have somebody I've been talking to in the last couple of weeks who's new, and she doesn't want to tell her newly teenage daughter. And I said, she already knows. My kids knew. They knew I was in trouble. They were smarter than I was when I was growing up. I grew up in an alcoholic home, and it made a difference. And I try to give my kids some slack because I knew they grew up in an alcoholic home. But they're proud of me now. And I can't tell you how important that is to me. They're wonderful, and when they say they're proud of me, it makes me feel kind of itchy, because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I should have been doing all along. You know, it's my privilege and also my chore, my duty to stay sober and be there for them and show up for them, because before I got sober, my response to any crisis was to go in the bathroom and throw up. I just wasn't there. I wasn't there when my husband's stepfather died, and he went to help his family, and I couldn't be there. I didn't know how to act. When I came in the program, I would say my overall being was that I didn't know how to act. I call it being naive. I think maybe it might have been stupid. It felt stupid. And I just wasn't brought up. And so I kind of pretended a lot. And I lied a lot. I lied for practice. Have you heard that? My sister and I didn't get along very well, but we always backed each other up, whatever the other one said. You know, when telling somebody, I went on Tuesday and did such and so, I know, yeah. Mm-hmm. And she'd back me up with whatever I was saying, and it didn't make any sense. I mean, why tell them it was Tuesday when it was really Monday? But it was a matter of being so scared of getting hurt that I would say, I'm over here. See, I'm over here. This isn't me, I'm over here. And so there was a lot of pretending, and there was a lot of guessing, and there was a lot of facade, and I certainly had a mask on because I wanted you to think that I was a good person. I wanted to be a good person, and I knew that I wasn't. But I wasn't really all that bad either. Mostly, I was just kind of, well, I was drunk. So, that might sum it up. When I was 5, I had a crisis year. I had diphtheria that year, and another thing happened. And when I got home from the hospital, my grandmother shamed me. She pulled my pants down and counted the needle marks on my back end, and it shamed me. And I didn't know that for years and years and years. I knew there was something, but I didn't know what. I didn't really understand what it was. And and I got two bee stings under my eye, on my face, and my face swelled up like this. And I remember the mailman made fun of me, and that shamed me. And it changed me. I have a photograph of me when I was about 1.5 years old, and I was ready for life. And I love that picture. It's my second step picture. It's like, see, I was really sane at one point. 1.5 years old. By the time I was 5, that was gone. And I began to hide. And I remember spending a lot of time alone between then and maybe high school. And when I was 12, 13, in that age range, I was run over by a car, and my family, my parents didn't take me to the hospital. And I had a broken foot, and it was traumatic, and they didn't do anything. They just pretended it didn't happen, basically. That's what they did. I mean, what else do you do when you're drunk? It doesn't happen. You don't want to deal with it. So, and that was strange, and I never got an answer to what happened, you know? It was like, oh no, that didn't happen. So the other thing that happened in that time range was that my parents told me on my 13th birthday that we were moving from Gastonia, North Carolina to Akron, Ohio. And when we got to Akron, Ohio, I think it was the year that the Supreme Court said that we could no longer segregate schools. And I went to Ohio with my little southern accent, y'all, and hey you, and I did not belong. I mean, we're talking, I hadn't belonged before, but I knew why now. I mean, I was broken, y'all. And you haven't heard me say that often, because I dropped that southern accent so fast, and I became a you guys, and nobody's been able to guess where I'm from since then. But I've always been told that when I talk to my relatives on the phone, I get it back. You know, it's useful sometimes. Speak family. So I didn't belong. I was in a strange land that had strange ideas and called me a stranger. I mean, but I did pretty well. I still spent a lot of time alone, but I managed to make friends, and I went to high school there. I didn't really like it. It was cold up there. And I wanted to get back in the warm weather. But I graduated from high school when I was 17. 3 months before that, now listen, because this is my claim to fame. I want to tell you that I took my first drink in the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio. And I was with 3 of my girlfriends, and they were older than me, and it was a beer, and about halfway down that beer, my social drinking came to an end. And from then on, I knew what the cure was. I knew. Because I ordered that beer, because they did. It tasted awful. But I drank that thing, and I felt different. And, all right, I was 17, graduated from high school, dumber than dumb, and not stupid intellectually. I made good grades, but I didn't know how to act. I didn't know what to do. I was always watching and trying to do what you do, so I look cool, you know, belong. Not that I understood any of that, but I look back and I can see what I was up to. So I went off to college in Berea, Ohio, farther north, and It was a Methodist school, which meant that there was no drinking allowed on campus. It was a huge campus. You would think that I would not get in any trouble, but I was smoking and I managed to drink. And before I turned 18, I'd been arrested for being drunk in public. And it wasn't my fault. I just wanted to get that clear. I wasn't driving. But here's one of the things that the policeman said to me. It's interesting that this many years later, I remember that he said to me, "Now, young lady, don't you ever admit to having more than 2 beers." Because I didn't know how much I had had to drink. I had had a lot of sharing going on, and I definitely was drunk, and they took my glasses away so I couldn't see anything, and that kind of threw me. But you know what? I never had more than 2 beers again. Quick study. I may not have known how to act, but I was a quick study on some things. And so I didn't stop drinking. I got on social probation. The boyfriend that I had, who was there to become a minister, decided that I was not his kind of girl. Surprise. Well, it surprised me. I wasn't doing anything wrong, just doing what we do. So I got a job the summer between first year and second year. I got a job doing what I had gone to school to do. And it was in the art department at O'Neill's department store in downtown Akron, Ohio, and I was a graphic artist. And I had no clue why they hired me, but I stayed there for about 1.5 years. And I had promised my parents that if I took this job that I would go back to school. So I started researching schools, and I looked at 2. I looked at Corcoran in Washington, D.C., and I looked at Ringling in Florida. And I couldn't quite see myself getting as far away from home as Florida. So I went to D.C., and I went, and but I tell you, I try not to think about what I was going to talk about tonight, because I was there. I do remember most of this stuff. But I was talking to a friend, and I started to tell her the story, and I call it the bourbon story, and I said, oh, well, I'm going to speak. I'll tell it. I don't think I've ever told the bourbon story, and I wrote a note after I talked to her, and I wrote down bourbon, and I wrote down bed, and I was going to tell those 2 stories. And I remember the bourbon story, but I don't know what the bed story was. And I looked at this note, and I thought, well, I could make something interesting up out of that, but I'm not supposed to do that. So I went to D.C., and I moved into the YWCA building. It was a big building, and I don't even know where it is now. In D.C. And I enrolled in Corcoran School of Art, and I got a job at Landsberg Department Store in their art department. And so when you move into the Y as a young lady, they give you a probationary period, a couple of weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, they said they were really sorry, but they didn't have a room for me, which was kind of odd because I was on the floor all by myself. I mean, but I had a little bit of a hard time keeping to the curfew, and by then I had found a guy who knew how to dance, and we did, and it got late, and, I got back. So I went to art school, and I worked in this department store, and I had to move. So I moved in to a boarding house that served 2 meals a day, and it was near DuPont Circle. And I met my first husband there, and in the dining room, and that was kind of cool and romantic, you know, and I felt like I was somebody, and had it going on, and I had a job, and then when I was done with Corcoran, I went full-time with Landsberg, and I worked there. And we got married, moved out to Virginia, and I worked in Landsberg's until I had my third child, and it was getting a little hard to find anybody who'd keep them. So I went into graphic design and had a studio at home, and now we can skip a lot of time. That's really, until my last drink, that's really my story. I lived in the country in Virginia. It was beautiful. It was a wonderful place to bring up. I had 3 boys. We had 5 acres in the country. We had a pond. We had a field for them to play football and woods to explore. And then we had DC, and we had the insect zoo at the Smithsonian. And I did all those things. I'll have to tell you one story on my oldest son. This is not a drunk story, but it's a good one. I took the boys downtown to Corcoran to see where I'd gone to school, and they had these beautiful sculptures throughout. It's also a gallery and a museum. And so we were going, and on the way home, I just had the 2 of them there, the 2 oldest, Kevin and Keith. And so I'm driving back over to Virginia, and Kevin says to me, "Mom, I'm not sure you should have shown us statues of naked ladies." And I said, "Well, son, would you rather I took you to see statues of naked little boys?" Well, he was, I thought he was going to faint. He's not forgotten it either. But the thing is, the reason I tell you that is that I did a good job as a mom. I drank, and I had short days. By the time I kind of came to and could think, and the time I started drinking, it was short. But I did a lot in that short time. Another thing I did, I kept on with the graphics. I never really stopped working. I taught basic drawing to grammar school age kids for the school system. And I started back to school, taking one class at a time. Of course, it was an art class. But I wasn't doing as much as the other mothers because I had short days. Because I started drinking. My deal with myself was that I would put supper on the table for my children, and once they had their dinner, I could pick up a drink. And I knew because of experience, that once I picked up a drink, that I was not good for anything else. I probably wouldn't serve dinner. I probably wouldn't even know that they had dinner or not. And most nights, at the end of my drinking, they went to bed on their own. Their dad was kind of absentee at that point. He had other interests, outside interests, that I wasn't invited to. And I was to keep the home fires burning, and it looked good on the outside. We had a big house in the country on a hill, 2 cars. Both worked, 3 boys in school. On paper, looked great. Underneath, I was getting sicker by the minute. And did I tell you the bourbon story? I skipped over the bourbon story. Let's go back to DC. It was an interesting time in DC. I met this guy, and he took me to a German restaurant on P Street and 14th. If any of you have ever lived in D.C., 14th Street's where they had the riots in 1963. Well, it was not my usual kind of neighborhood, but it was this big, huge German restaurant, and they had these swings, and they sang. They did all this singing, and that part was fun. And what I had to drink that night was bourbon. And before the night was out, this guy, first date, this guy had me in the men's room with me throwing up and him holding on to me and him saying to these guys, "Get out," she said, "Get out, get out of the men's room." We didn't date again. Isn't that a puzzle? Isn't that a puzzle? That's a puzzle. All right, so that's the bourbon story. But the other thing about bourbon is that my mother drank bourbon, and she started drinking it with plain water because she said the ice gave her a headache. So, I learned well. My father's favorite saying was, "Have a little snort, it's good for what ails you." And I learned, and I did, until I realized that my medicine was not my medicine. It was the problem, it wasn't the cure. But I really believed that I couldn't make it through the day without alcohol. And by the time I got in, I was ready to stop drinking, I was physically sick and mentally. I would sit and think, if I just went in and went crazy, they'd have to take care of me. Whoever they were, they'd have to take care of me. And because I still didn't know how to act. I mean, here I'm a mother and I'm doing a lot of things. I mean, I made my own baby food. I was into health food. We grew a lot of our vegetables, and I was doing a lot of things right, but I didn't feel like it. I just couldn't get the feeling that I did things right. And I was lonely because we lived far enough out that, my husband would come home a lot. So I pretended a lot. I remember sitting, I had this big brown chair. Now I've told this in my story before, so you're familiar with my big brown overstuffed rocking chair that had the ottoman next to the wall. And I would be drinking and sitting in that chair, and I'd put it down between the wall and the chair and think my children didn't know about it. And I was hiding. That's how, that was my way of hiding my beer and my wine coolers. Aren't you impressed? I mean, I wasn't very good at that either. So, what happened was, one fall, I recognized that I was not very good at doing holiday parties. I would get in trouble. And I would sit in that chair and think about it, and I decided, I'm good at making proclamations. I made one last year that lasted a good, 6 months. Lifetime, never again. So that hadn't changed. So I decided that I wasn't going to drink at any of the parties through the holiday season, so I wouldn't get in trouble. Because I would do things like decide I was going to be the go-go girl. I could dance. So, and I shudder to think. Let's don't think about that. All right, that's a way to handle that one. Just don't. So I went to these parties and I didn't drink. I drank before and I drank after, but I didn't drink during. So I would tell people that I was a teetotaler, and that's why I wasn't drinking. And I was, that moment. I mean, let's live in the moment. I wasn't drinking at that party. But New Year's came along, and everybody deserves a beer on New Year. I mean, who wouldn't have a little something on New Year? I went to a friend's house for a New Year's party. My husband graciously met me there. And at midnight, she cut me off. I mean, I did have the one beer. And when I got in the program, I understood it's the first drink that gets you drunk, because that beer was all it took for me to just go for it. And I drank everything she let me have. I didn't stop until she cut me off, and I was furious. And I drove home, and it wasn't very far. In the country, it wasn't very far, not much in between. So, but I couldn't go to bed. I couldn't lay down. I was agitated, and I paced, and I remember drinking tea in the middle of my kitchen and pacing and not knowing what was wrong and feeling just out of body, out of sorts. And I had this vision of me coming after me to kill me. And it was so real. I never did go to bed that night, and the next morning I told my children and my husband that I was never going to drink again, because it had come together, and I had seen that it was alcohol. I mean, I knew, and in the middle of that fall, with those ideas about holidays, I had asked for help. And I remember that, and I got help, but it took me kind of the spiral route. You know, it wasn't just ask for help and boom, it's there. It was months. And my aunt in Raleigh called me and asked me to take my mother to my house in the country and dry her out. And I knew that wasn't going to work, because we had enough booze to start our own bar. So I came to Raleigh and met with an alcoholism counselor and told her that I had solved my problem, that I wasn't going to drink again. And this was, I don't know, 4 or 5 months after New Year's. It was the spring. And so spring of 1980. And I had talked to this woman, wonderful woman, and she had patted me on the hand and said, well, you just go to Al-Anon. And I did. I went to a couple of Al-Anon meetings in Raleigh, and I even took Mother to an Al-Anon meeting, and I begged Mother to stop drinking. And she said it wasn't any good. She couldn't do it on her own, so she would do it on her own. And if she couldn't, then she promised she would get help. I don't even need to tell you how that worked out. So I went back home, and I did go to Al-Anon. I was kind of curious. They thought I should, go to more than one meeting, but I did. And about 6 weeks later, after having gone, I went in the back door of the church, because they still do. They had the Al-Anon meetings and the AA meetings pretty much at the same times. And so in one room is Al-Anon, the other room is AA, and I would go around the back of the church and go in the back door, so I didn't have to go by the door where the AAs were meeting, because I knew in some way that they would recognize me. And I didn't want them to see me. So I talked at first in Al-Anon about not drinking myself, and I found out that that was not de rigueur. So I quit that real fast. And but I went to the open speaker meeting on Thursday night at the Big Baptist Church, and I would sit in a row with my Al-Anon friends and listen to the speaker, and I was laughing at what the speaker said, and I was understanding the speaker, and they weren't. And so I chose the prettiest, youngest young lady who was in AA, and I went up there and said, I think I need to come to one of your meetings. And so, of course, I ended up in an AA meeting, and 2 or 3 meetings later, I know it was a Monday morning. I don't remember how many meetings I'd been to, but not very many. I got up in the morning, I was angry. Well, that wasn't unusual, but this time I was angry because I couldn't find my 12 and 12 that I had bought, and I wanted to read it in the morning, and my husband wanted 2 fried eggs, and that made me mad. He just had 1. I mean, there wasn't anything to be mad about. I was just angry, and it was from the inside out. It was just, I couldn't live with an anger. And as soon as he left and the kids went outside to play, I started drinking beer. There was beer in the refrigerator, and I knew it would cure what was wrong. It would cure the pain, physical pain I was in. It would cure the emotional pain I was in. It would cure the anger. It would cure. It was the cure. And I stood over the sink, and I was pouring that beer in as fast. It still didn't taste very good. I was pouring that beer in as fast as I could get it in, and it was dribbling down my chin. And I got enough beer in me to go into a blackout. And late that afternoon, my oldest son was standing over me with a checkbook saying, "Mom, if you'll just sign it, I'll fill it in." Because we'd had a guy working on our sidewalk all day, needed to be paid. And I didn't know he was there. And I remember my youngest son, somewhere during the day, had tried to get me to eat something. That's not the way it's supposed to work. So when I went to a meeting that night, and somebody took a look at me coming in the door and said, you need a step meeting. And it was a first step meeting. They did that there. They would see somebody new and they would start over the first step. And at the end of that meeting, I couldn't get out of the chair. It was like my body didn't exist. Sitting there just that amount of time, couldn't make it move. And so the man beside me just put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Let her stay there." And that's the moment I took the first step. I knew there was no design. There was no denying in my mind that my life was unmanageable, and it was alcohol. So I promised myself I wasn't going to do a long drunk-a-log, but there you are. So it wasn't that I just jumped in. I had the gift of desperation. I wanted it, and I did what I was told. I went through 2 or 3 sponsors until I found the right one, and I did the steps. I did what I was told. My life fell apart. It was held together as a fantasy before I got sober, and as reality set in, there was clarity and things had to change. So I did leave my first husband when I felt like I could. That I had my wits about me enough to actually support myself and take care of myself. And so I started over. I started a lot of things over. And things have changed for me so many times in sobriety. And I've moved quite a few times. I've lived in a lot of different areas and gone to a lot of different kinds of AA meetings. And some places I've lived, I've thought, how could they ever stay sober doing this? And, we have the ability to be judgmental. But I stayed sober while I was there. And I came here with a purpose. I came here to study with an artist who lives in Southern Pines, and I love these meetings. I love you guys. It's really a wonderful place for me, and I've gotten into service here. I've always one of the things that my first real sponsor, the one that lasted a while, did was she was always had a service job, and she got me into service right away, and I kind of everywhere I went as I moved into a new place, I would get a small job, and sometimes it's all, literature chair or something, coffee maker. But that was the way to belong. If you go from one place to the other, the way to feel like you belong in the rooms of AA, because just because I'm a member of AA and I'm sober now, doesn't mean that I walk into a new place and automatically, kaboom, I feel at home. But once I do some work, some service, then I do. And here, I've pretty much had a service job since I got here. Last year I took on DCM, which is District Committee Member. And as I say that, I'm going to remember to tell you that I won't be here for the anniversary because the committee, of which I am a member, is meeting in Raleigh that weekend. And I'll be there taking your conscience to the next level and voting on things that will need to change or that we want, decisions we want to make at the state level, which will then go to the next level, to GSO. Last year was a tough year for me. The first couple of weeks of January, my sister died, my older sister, my only sister, and that was the last of my, what do you call it, family. Not family, I have a lot of cousins, but my mother, my father, and my sister, and they all three died. I would have put on their death certificate. They died of lifestyle. They all drank and smoked and died of some part of, because of that. And that was tough. And then something wonderful happened at the same time. I got a call and was offered a job. It was my fantasy job that I never thought could happen in Southern Pines. And I also became your DCM. And I figured I should quit that job. My service sponsor, who lives in Winston-Salem, said, no, you don't get to quit your AA job just because you got a job. I have a job. And so I did the job, and I did DCM, and I kind of put off the grieving process until 5 months after I got this job. They closed the business, and now I didn't have my fantasy job anymore, and I tanked. And AA saved my life again, because I had that job and I had to get up and go out and do something for AA that had saved my life so many times. And so it was another time I need to quit this, and no, you don't need to quit this, you need to do the job. Well, I got up and I kept going, and people were there and they listened. And basically what I feel happened is that I grieved both my sister and the job at the same time. It was a fantasy. Did you hear that word? It was a fantasy. It wasn't real. I thought that was the job for me in the whole world, and it came to Southern Pines and was offered me. And it wasn't true. It wasn't what I had imagined it to be. I had done this before, and it wasn't the same. And how could it be the same? It wasn't the same. I'm so glad now that it didn't continue, because it was not right for me. But it took me a while. I remember sitting in this room. It must have been a Tuesday night. It was sometime in December, and the topic was probably gratitude. And that morning, I'd done a lot of journaling, a lot of thinking, and I spent a lot of time alone anyway. That's what studio artists do. So I had done a lot of thinking about this job and my family and what was I going to do with myself? And my proclamation was when they closed it was a gallery. When they closed the gallery, I put all my paints away and I was never going to paint again. Da, da, for the rest of my life. And I've had it. I was mad at art. I was mad at the world. I was alone again. Not that my sister and I ever did get along, but I felt like I was on the front lines. You know, you got all these relatives ahead of you in line. Well, I'd moved up the line. Feeling kind of old and used up. But I've had the realization that the job was a fantasy and that the fantasy was done. I didn't have to think about it anymore. I didn't have to want it anymore. I didn't have to think about it anymore. I had gone, I had done it, I had learned the reality, I had seen the reality. It wasn't fun. It was a lot of work. One of the things I had to do with that job was give parties where I served wine and cheese. And a lot of you know I'm allergic to cheese and I don't drink wine, and I was, you know, not my favorite. So things changed. And here's what I know now. Here's what I can tell you now. I'm in a better place now than I have ever been in my whole life. And I made another decision. You know, this is, hey, it's what I do. I've been going around talking about being old for the last couple of years. And mostly I'm trying to get used to it. And it's not happening. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Done. You can see for yourself. I'm not going to try to tell you anymore. So, somebody agrees with me. Yay. So, the promises have come true. I don't think they had ever. I've surrendered. I've really surrendered. I can sing that song. I surrender all. I surrender. And the promises are here. I'm not worried. Life hasn't changed. I mean, I still have stuff. I still have decisions to make, and I still have things to do, and some things I want to do, and some things I don't want to do. But mostly, I get up in the morning. This morning I was up early, my cat got me up, and I thought, well, it's really kind of early, I'm not going to feed him yet, or he'll want, you know, he'll get off schedule. And so I went in my studio and I thought, I'll just draw. I have a drawing assignment, and I'll just draw for about half an hour. And 2 hours later I looked at the clock. And it was all that was happening for me. I was so in the moment. And it's such a privilege, and I'm finally beginning to admit artist. I have not ever said I'm an artist. That's the first time. That's the first time. I'm an artist, I'm an alcoholic, and I owe it all to you. Thank you.
Thank you.